Good morning. Today's video has to do with the U.S. government, specifically Social Security. All the links that I reference here will be in the description below, so you can follow along with what I'm talking about. Front page of the New York Times today is another one of these pieces that talks about Social Security, blah, 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 potentially running out of money, and the need for increased tax revenue to fund Social Security, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, any type of social safety net in the U.S. gets this type of ridiculous coverage, something that is not even debated in other civilized countries. In other words, the social safety net, it's required, and it's beyond debate. But in the United States, we still have these imbecilic debates about this. First of all, let me explain something to you. As this revolves around, one of the things it revolves around is the U.S. debt. Constantly hear this talk, debt, blah, blah, blah. Government is not a business, and government is not your checkbook. So first of all this debt that the United States has incurred, 78% of that debt is owned by us, the U.S. That's right. And the number one holder of that debt is the Social Security Trust Fund. So the quick and dirty is that we issue debt, we buy our debt, and the money comes into the government. And then there is tax revenue that comes in as well, which is basically not used to fund the government. It's used to regulate the supply of money in circulation, either up or down through increases in taxes or decreases in taxes. You have to understand this because basically Social Security can never run out of money unless, of course, you believe that the United States can run out of money, which it can't. So, in effect, the United States issues debt to to itself. And then we have the National Railroad Trust, which has $6 trillion and holds $6 trillion in U.S. debt. And all this debt generates interest. So the notion that Social Security relies on tax revenue to be funded is pure nonsense. And even, of course, Bernie Sanders, who, generally speaking, is a fraud, plays along with this nonsense. The idea here is to not let people know how government is funded, and it's basically through the issuance of debt that we buy ourselves, buy it back, and get dollars. So it's a simple process, and basically, as Alan Greenspan pointed out years ago, America can never run out of money, and you will never have to concern yourself with hyperinflation or anything, because as long as there's product available, or a country produces goods, the hyperinflation, as what people talk about all the time, is not any concern at all. And currently, the United States still produces goods, and you only get inflation when you have two things: scarcity, or if you don't have scarcity, you just have greed. And what we're seeing now, the inflation is based on corporate greed, and the greed of people too. You know, they have a little donut shop, and they decide they're going to jack up the price because, well, someone in the chain of products that go into a donut jacked up their prices as well. Just plain and simple greed. So don't let anyone ever tell you that government, the Social Security, particularly the social safety net, has anything to do with the debt. In fact, it doesn't. We're very rapidly approaching the point where no one owns our debt except ourselves. And because most countries are major debtors, China and Russia, maybe a couple of trillion apiece, are liquidating or have been liquidating their treasury holdings over the last several years. And so that is, we're going to get to the point where Japan, which has a debt to GDP ratio of, 262%, they basically just buy their own debt. And some of it is bought by investors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So here we are again. The government can afford anything it wants and provide anything it wants to the public. And I would just add one more thing about the debt. Whatever that figure is today, I don't even know because I don't pay attention to it, because it's an absolute absurdity to even concern oneself for it. But if you want to look at that debt, $14 trillion. $14 trillion of that debt is money which we borrowed from ourselves to fund the war in Afghanistan for 20 years. Now, this is in the SIGAR report, the comprehensive report, Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction. That is buried deep in the report. When it first came out, it was published exactly in terms of that number. But then because somebody realized, holy moly, we have to break it down into smaller numbers, so we just give the figure for what we spent on the military. The number looks slightly smaller. But we borrowed $14 trillion from ourselves to basically, remove the Taliban from power and reinstall them, 20 years later after they had a nice vacation in the south of France or something like that. So when anyone ever tells you that the debt, the U.S. debt, the debt is a problem for people. In other words, not the U.S. debt. Your own debt is a problem because you're not a sovereign entity. You can't just print money like the government can, whereas the government can print all the money it wants without concern for, generally speaking, anything. And if you thought the debt was a problem, well, here we are again with another massive increase in the military budget. Why does no one say, well, you know what, maybe we should relax that spending as well? And one last thing to keep in mind, about 80% of the federal budget is mandated spending. And that is spending that Congress, or that has been authorized for all eternity by acts of Congress, laws, etc. And only about 20% of the budget is discretionary spending. In other words, the money government can use for anything else. Basically, little Lulus for congressional members, $1 million here, $2 million there for a new playground in their district, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It amounts to quite a bit of money, but it's basically the slush fund for members of Congress that they can use in any way they feel like it, to their heart's content. Anyway, it's just part of the corruption of the system. Anyway, just keep that in mind. And once again, I'm just telling you these things because this is the way the world works. And you might not have known this, but hopefully you do now.